I smelled the burning pine before sunrise, long before most of the neighborhood even had their lights on. At first, I thought it was just someone's fireplace drifting across the valley. But when I stepped onto my back deck and felt the dry heat crawling across my skin, I knew this wasn't the kind of smoke you ignore. It had that sharp, resin-filled bite that wildfire smoke always carries, the kind that settles in the back of your throat like a warning you can taste. My neighborhood, Cedar Hills, was usually silent at this hour, calm and perfectly curated like the HOA demanded. But that morning the quiet felt heavy, too heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I leaned on the railing and scanned the horizon. A faint orange smear clung to the treetops miles away, barely visible through the haze. Still, it was enough. I'd lived in California long enough to recognize the signs. Every year the fires got worse, more unpredictable, more violent. Winds could shift in minutes. Flames could travel like living creatures. And our neighborhood sat right at the edge of a canyon that might as well have been a fuse waiting to catch. I walked down the street to warn a few neighbors, but most of them brushed me off with half-awake confusion or polite nods they didn't mean. A couple waved from behind their coffee mugs. One guy actually laughed and said, "It's fire season, Michael. Smoke happens." Maybe they didn't want to believe the danger. Maybe they were too used to being told everything was fine. Or maybe they were just scared to act without HOA approval, which was a problem in itself. By the time I got back to my driveway, my stomach had tightened into a knot. I knew what I had to do. The HOA board might have been a headache most days, but they controlled everything in Cedar Hills, from landscaping to lighting to who could replace their own mailbox. If anyone was going to alert the neighborhood officially, it had to be them. So I headed to the clubhouse, rehearsing how to explain what I'd seen without sounding like I was exaggerating. Karen Whitfield, our HOA president, was already outside when I arrived, clipboard in hand like she woke up with it. Karen was the kind of woman who could smile and insult you at the same time. She believed rules were sacred, and she wielded them like weapons. The moment she saw me walking toward her, she sighed in a way that told me she'd already decided I was a problem. I told her about the smoke, about the smell, about the glow on the horizon. She didn't even let me finish before she laughed. Actually laughed right in my face. "Michael, you can't keep jumping at shadows," she said. "Every time you smell a campfire, you think the world is ending. It's paranoia." The board members stood behind her, nodding like obedient statues. One of them suggested I should refrain from spreading unfounded fear. Karen took it a step further and warned that filing unnecessary reports or causing alarm could result in fines under the Community Disruption Clause. As I walked home, frustrated and uneasy, the wind suddenly shifted. A heavy gust slammed into the neighborhood, carrying a thick wave of smoke that rolled over the rooftops like a dark, advancing tide. And for the first time that morning, I realized the fire wasn't distant anymore. It was coming straight for us. Karen didn't waste a second. The very next morning, as I stepped outside to check how thick the smoke had gotten overnight, she marched straight up my driveway with her clipboard tucked tight against her chest. Before I could even say a word, she held out a bright yellow violation notice like it was some kind of trophy. "Yard debris hazard," she announced, pointing at a few pine needles on the edge of my walkway. Ash drifted between us in slow, delicate spirals, landing on her blazer like dark snowflakes, yet she acted as if the world wasn't literally burning around us. It felt surreal, like she was living in a different reality entirely. I tried to reason with her, telling her the smoke was heavier than yesterday, that the air felt hotter, drier, dangerous. She ignored all of it. Instead, she glanced at the sky and said, "Michael, you can't blame Mother Nature for your lack of yard maintenance. It would have been almost funny if everything didn't smell like a campfire had swallowed the neighborhood." That's when Dennis Pike arrived, the HOA's self-appointed compliance inspector. Dennis had the personality of a wet sponge and the loyalty of a guard dog chained to Karen's back door. He stood beside her, nodding along like every word she uttered was scripture. I'd seen him harass elderly neighbors for having wind chimes that were too reflective, or for leaving their trash bins out 5 minutes past pickup time. Today he glared at my supposedly dangerous pine needles like they were ticking explosives. As we stood there, the ashfall grew thicker, turning the cul-de-sac gray. The heat pressed against us like someone had opened an oven door. I wiped a streak of soot from my cheek and said, "You two need to take this seriously. Wildfire conditions are extreme. The wind shifted overnight. We're in a vulnerable zone." I didn't tell them the full truth yet, that I used to volunteer with a wildfire support unit when I was younger, clearing brush lines and assisting evacuation drills. I'd learned to trust my instincts during those summers, and right now every instinct I had was screaming. Karen folded her arms, amused. "Men always love drama during fire season, don't they?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "A little smoke and suddenly everyone thinks they're a hero." Dennis chuckled, a weak, awkward sound that only made her smirk wider. I warned them again, firmer this time. The air quality was rapidly worsening. The ash wasn't normal. The temperature spike wasn't normal. But the more serious I became, the more entertained they looked, as if my concern existed solely for their amusement. Meanwhile, a few neighbors had started peering out from behind their curtains or stepping onto porches, fanning the smoky air with their hands. I could see the worry in their eyes, worry they didn't dare voice. Everyone in Cedar Hills knew what happened when you challenged Karen. She controlled the board, the fines, the approvals, the narrative. But even their silence couldn't hide the truth now. The sky was turning a sickly shade of orange, and the smell of burning timber was growing sharp, invasive. Then, just as I opened my mouth to speak again, a low rumble echoed down the street. I turned to see a sheriff's truck rolling into the neighborhood, lights flashing through the smoky haze. And in that moment, everything changed. The sheriff's truck barely came to a stop before the passenger door swung open and a man in a soot-stained uniform stepped out with sharp, purposeful strides. His vest read Deputy Fire Marshal, and the moment his boots hit the pavement, he scanned the street like someone who already knew he wouldn't like what he found. Then his eyes locked on the drifting ash, the orange tint in the sky, the haze swirling low to the ground. "Who reported active smoke movement?" he called out, voice steady but urgent. For a second, the whole neighborhood went silent. "I did," I answered, stepping forward. He studied me with quick assessment, recognition, relief, and then concern. "Good," he said. "You did the right thing. I'm Deputy Fire Marshal Cole Ramirez." He shook my hand firmly before turning to the rest of the street. "I need to speak with whoever runs your HOA." That, unfortunately, brought Karen striding over like she had been summoned for a royal inspection. Clipboard still in hand, chin tilted up, she looked Cole up and down like his presence was a personal inconvenience. "I'm the HOA president," she said with a stiff smile. "And before we jump to conclusions, I think it's important to understand that our community is prone to overreacting during fire season." Cole stared at her like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a confirmed wildfire moving in this direction. Winds are shifting quickly. We need your cooperation." Karen crossed her arms with exaggerated confidence. "With respect, Deputy, we've had smoke drift before. It doesn't mean the fire is actually a threat to us. People exaggerate. Especially certain homeowners who like attention." I could practically feel her eyes burning into the side of my face. Cole didn't flinch. He pointed toward the canyon, where a faint plume of darker smoke was beginning to rise above the ridge. "That smoke isn't drift. That's active movement. I'm here because the fire jumped a ridge last night. If the wind continues to push from the east, this neighborhood will be in the line of impact." Instead of listening, Karen turned to the board members who stood behind her like trained shadows. "See? This is why panic spreads," she muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "People always want to make a dramatic moment out of a normal seasonal event." Cole exhaled slowly, and without another word, he motioned for me to follow him a few steps away. We walked toward my driveway, and once we were out of Karen's earshot, his tone dropped to something far more serious. "Michael, right? Whatever you sensed this morning was real. Conditions are dangerous. The fire is moving faster than projections. If it reaches the canyon, embers could hit your rooftops within hours. My stomach tightened. Karen won't take action. She never does, Cole replied. Your HOA blocked half the fire safety upgrades we recommended last year. Brush clearance, exit route signage, gate automation, all denied. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed and then went dead. Around us, a few neighbors tapped their screens with frustrated confusion. Cell towers are getting hit, Cole said grimly. Expect outages. Then his radio crackled violently, a voice shouting over static. Cole grabbed it, eyes narrowing as he listened. When he looked up, every trace of calm was gone. The fire just jumped containment, he said. And it's heading straight toward your evacuation route. I should have expected what came next. But somehow, even after everything, the HOA still managed to surprise me. Not even 2 hours after Deputy Fire Marshal Cole left the neighborhood, Karen sent out an urgent notice calling for an emergency HOA meeting regarding community disruption. For a moment, I actually thought she had finally come to her senses, that maybe the sight of ash on her blazer and the fire marshal's warning had shaken something loose. But when I walked into the clubhouse and saw every board member seated with their clipboards lined up like weapons, I realized this wasn't about safety, this was about punishing me. The room hummed with tension, neighbors filling the seats, whispering among themselves. The smoky air had followed us indoors, clinging to everyone's clothes. Karen stood at the front, clearing her throat dramatically before announcing, "We are here today because a certain homeowner has caused unnecessary panic and disruption." She stared straight at me, eyes cold and triumphant. "Michael Turner, you have been spreading false reports about a fire threatening this community." I couldn't believe it. "False?" I said. "You saw the fire marshal yourself." Karen slammed her palm on the table. "I saw a man exaggerating conditions to justify his presence. You, on the other hand, have sent residents into fear. That is unacceptable." The board members nodded like they were trained to obey her rhythm. She continued, "Due to your actions, the HOA is issuing new fines. First, unapproved. Generator storage." She held up a red notice. "Your generator violates visible placement codes." I stared at her, stunned. "I have that generator for emergencies, like the one we're in." "And second," she said sharply, "improperly stored hoses. They create visual clutter." Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of how ridiculous this was. A few even whispered things like, "This is insane," and "He's trying to help." But none of them dared speak above a whisper. Karen had built her authority on intimidation. People feared retaliation more than wildfire. Then she leaned forward, voice dropping into something icy. "If you continue spreading unverified information and creating panic, we will consider legal action for defamation and disruption." I felt the weight of her threat settle over the room. This wasn't just about fines. She wanted to silence me. She wanted control so badly that she'd rather challenge a wildfire than admit she was wrong. Outside, the wind beat harder against the windows. The room dimmed as the sky grew darker, filled with thick smoke. Everyone glanced up when the lights flickered once, then again. A few people gasped. Even Karen paused, her smile twitching slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Minor power fluctuations," she announced. "Nothing to be alarmed about." But the smell of burning wood was getting stronger. My throat felt raw, and the air had taken on a strange yellow tint. I could hear distant helicopter blades thumping through the smoke. Then the lights flickered a third time, longer than the first two, and a deep hush swept over the room. A second later, the entire clubhouse, and the whole neighborhood around it, went pitch black. When the power went out, something inside the neighborhood shifted. It wasn't just darkness. It was fear, sudden and uncontained, spreading from house to house like an invisible spark. As I stepped outside, the sound of generators rumbled across the cul-de-sac, each one kicking on at slightly different times, filling the smoky air with a low mechanical growl. The sky had transformed into a blood-red canopy, and the air carried a sickening smell. Burning plastic mixed with scorched bark, sharp enough to sting my eyes. Ash flakes drifted down steadily, But this time they weren't soft gray flecks. Some were glowing at the edges. Embers, small, bright, and deadly, began landing on lawns, roofs, and dry hedges. A single ember could ignite a home in seconds given the right wind, and we now had plenty of that. I hurried along the street, knocking on a few doors, telling people to wet down their yards or prepare to leave. Some followed my advice without question, but others hesitated, glancing nervously toward the HOA office as if Karen would materialize and punish them. And in a way she did, because a few minutes later, Dennis Pike appeared on the sidewalk wearing an official-looking vest and carrying Karen's clipboard like a badge of authority. He was going door to door, holding up the papers and announcing in a loud, forced voice, HOA directive. Residents should stay put until further notice. There is no confirmed evacuation order. I could hardly believe it. Dennis! I called out, striding toward him through the ash-thick air. Are you insane? Look around you. Embers are falling. The sky is glowing. We need people ready to leave, not trapped inside their homes. He stiffened but didn't stop walking. Karen said we can't allow panic, he replied, his voice trembling slightly. She said leaving early creates chaos and encourages looters. Looters? I snapped. Dennis, the fire is practically at the canyon. We are running out of time. He hesitated, eyes darting nervously across the neighborhood. You don't understand. Karen can't afford another community panic incident. Not after last year's false alarm. If she loses control now. His voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear enough. Karen's pride mattered more to her than the safety of the people living under her authority. I looked him square in the eyes. You're risking lives following her orders. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might finally break away from her shadow. But then he muttered, I have to finish my route, and hurried down the street. Before I could follow him, a deep mechanical sound filled the air. Helicopter blades thundering overhead. 2 firefighting helicopters surged through the smoky sky, low enough that I felt the vibration in my chest. A spotlight swept across the homes, illuminating drifting ash and frightened faces staring up from driveways. Then another noise echoed through the evacuations. Haze, a crackling speaker, magnified and urgent. A loud, booming voice carried across the neighborhood. Residents of Cedar Hills, the megaphone announced, prepare for evacuation immediately. Karen positioned herself in the center of the cul-de-sac like she was preparing to deliver a presidential address, not stand in the path of a wildfire. Embers drifted down around her, tiny orange sparks that hissed when they hit the pavement. Yet she didn't flinch. Instead, she slammed her clipboard onto a folding podium someone dragged out from the clubhouse and declared loudly, This HOA will not evacuate without my approval. Her voice cracked through the smoky air with a confidence that felt completely disconnected from reality. A few residents gathered around her, unsure, their eyes darting between the fiery sky and Karen's rigid figure. Some of them clung to her words because fear makes people desperate for someone who sounds certain. Others looked terrified but stayed silent, the weight of HOA power anchoring them in place. Decades of strict rules and aggressive fines had taught them one thing: challenging Karen rarely ended well. This supposed evacuation warning, Karen continued, waving her hand dismissively toward the direction of the megaphone announcement, is based on inaccurate information. The fire is miles away. There is no reason to panic or act prematurely. I stepped forward, unable to hold back. Karen, the helicopters didn't just fly over us for fun. The fire marshal didn't come here to exaggerate. The ash, the heat, the visibility, all of it means the fire is close. She glared at me like I was the one committing a crime. Michael, you are feeding hysteria. You've been trying to undermine this board for months. This is just your latest excuse. Behind her, families hovered uncertainly. Parents clutched their kids' hands. A few older residents leaned on walkers, coughing from the thickening smoke. They wanted to trust their instincts, but years of conditioning had them second-guessing themselves. Karen made it easy for them to doubt the danger. She made it sound like leaving early was an act of betrayal, not survival. I moved through the crowd, speaking softly to individuals. You need to get your go bags, pack medication, prepare your cars. Even if you don't leave right now, be ready. Some nodded hesitantly. Others whispered, I want to, but I don't want trouble. My phone vibrated weakly. 1 bar signal, then none, then one again. I pressed the call button for Cole, trying to reach him before the towers went down completely. When he answered, the connection crackled, but his voice pushed through. Michael, listen. The fire jumped again. It's closer than predicted. You can't wait for an official order. Get people moving. Karen's stopping them, I said. She's telling everyone to stay. Cole swore under his breath. Then you need to break through. That. Embers are going to hit your rooftops any minute. I looked around. The heat had become suffocating, thick and aggressive, wrapping the entire neighborhood in an oppressive blanket. Visibility was dropping fast. Houses at the far end of the street were now silhouettes behind a wall of smoke. The wind picked up again, hot and erratic, carrying more glowing particles through the air. Karen climbed back onto her makeshift podium and shouted, Everyone remain calm. No one is leaving until we have proper HOA confirmation. Just as she finished, a bright ember drifted down in a slow spiraling fall and landed in a bone-dry bush beside her podium. It ignited instantly. The bush beside Karen's podium went up so fast it felt unreal. Flames shooting upward like someone had poured gasoline on it. Her eyes widened for the first time all day, but before she could even react, another ember drifted down onto the roof of a nearby shed. At first it glowed faintly, then it flared bright orange, and within seconds, the entire wooden structure crackled to life. By the time we noticed the neighbor's shed ignite, the fire wasn't approaching anymore. It was already inside our neighborhood. I sprinted toward the shed, mentally mapping the fire's path as I ran. The eastern wind was pushing the flames straight toward our row of houses. The canyon slope acted like a funnel, accelerating every gust. If we didn't slow the spread right now, the entire block could go up in minutes. Sarah Coleman, my neighbor from 3 houses down, appeared beside me with a hose already in hand. Her eyes were red from smoke, but she didn't hesitate. Michael, help me aim it at the base, she shouted. We worked together, water hissing loudly as it hit the flames, steam rising in thick clouds. The heat radiating from the burning shed felt like standing too close to a bonfire. Only this one had no boundaries, no safety circle, just raw destruction looking for more fuel. The fire crackled, popped, and reached for the fence line, spreading along the dry wood like a fuse burning toward a bomb. Behind us, Karen screeched with fury instead of fear. Stop! You can't modify or damage community structures without HOA approval. That shed is listed under restricted alteration. I didn't even look at her. Karen, the fire doesn't care about your approvals. She kept shouting threats while Sarah and I soaked the fence and the bushes around it, trying to create a buffer before the fire spread to the next property. Sweat poured down my back, my shirt clinging to me. My throat burned from smoke, every breath scratchy and shallow. Even as we worked, embers continued dropping, some landing on lawns, others rolling dangerously close to dry gutters. Then, finally, I heard sirens. Fire trucks roared down the main road toward the entrance of the neighborhood, but instead of pulling in, they stopped. Their engines revved, lights flashing, but the trucks couldn't get through. The HOA gate, our beautiful, expensive, security-enhancing gate, was locked manually, and I knew exactly who had done it. Karen locked them out, Sarah shouted, her voice shaking with disbelief. I didn't think. I just ran. The firefighters were shouting from the other side, banging on the metal bars, trying to force it open. I grabbed the emergency manual release lever on our side, only to find it secured with a padlock. Karen really had locked it. My heart slammed in my chest. If the trucks couldn't get through, the whole street would be gone. I grabbed a nearby landscaping rock, raised it high, and smashed the padlock with every ounce of strength I had. It snapped, metal fragments scattering. The gate finally groaned open, firefighters rushing through. Karen charged toward me, face red and twisted. That is destruction of HOA property. I'll have you arrested. But before I could answer, a fire captain jumped out of the truck, staring past me with horror. He pointed toward the line of houses behind us. "Everyone move!" he shouted. "The flames are advancing right behind those homes." The fire captain's warning had barely left his mouth when two sheriff's vehicles barreled into the neighborhood, sirens cutting through the smoke-thick air. Deputies jumped out, waving residents back as they moved door to door, yelling over the chaos, "Mandatory evacuation. You have minutes. Maybe less." Their urgency snapped whatever little composure people had left. Panic ignited faster than any ember. Doors burst open, footsteps thundered across porches, and voices rose in frantic overlapping shouts. I rushed toward my house to grab my go-bag, but before I could get there, I saw something unbelievable. Karen standing in the middle of the main road with her arms outstretched, blocking the path like a human barricade. "You cannot evacuate without HOA authorization," she screamed. "This is not an official order. This is unnecessary panic." A deputy skidded to a stop in front of her. "Ma'am, move, now. The fire is at the rear of the neighborhood." Karen planted her feet harder. "I won't allow this community to be misled." The deputy didn't argue. He simply grabbed her by the elbow and pulled her out of the way as she shrieked about lawsuits and authority. The moment she was moved aside, cars surged forward like floodwater finally breaking through a dam. Residents scrambled everywhere. Families hauled luggage, pet carriers, photo albums, and whatever they could grab in a matter of seconds. Children clung to parents, coughing into shirts. Dogs barked in confusion. A few people ran back inside for one last thing before remembering the flames weren't waiting for them. The heat was rising fast, turning every breath into something sharp and punishing. The smoke stung my eyes so badly I kept wiping tears away just to see where I was going. I spotted Sarah trying to load her terrified golden retriever into her SUV while her two kids cried in the back seat. She looked overwhelmed, frozen between what to grab next and what to leave behind. I jogged over and helped lift the dog in. "Get moving," I said. "I'll check on the Millers." The Millers were an elderly couple at the far end of the street. I found Mr. Miller trying to navigate his walker through a yard already littered with ash and burning debris. "We can't find our medicines," Mrs. Miller kept saying, voice trembling. I grabbed the small box from their counter, helped them into their car, and told them to follow the deputy's convoy. But when I looked toward the exit, my stomach dropped. The main road had already clogged with cars, a long line stretching from the gate all the way past the clubhouse. People honked uselessly, engines revving, trying to inch forward even as the smoke swallowed more of the street. Above us, helicopters made low passes, their rotors blasting wind that only stirred the embers more violently. Visibility shrank to just a few houses. Heat radiated off the asphalt. A siren wailed in the distance, then another. The fire's roar, deep and hungry, grew louder with every passing second. And through all this, Karen still hadn't given up control. I saw her storming across the clubhouse lawn, shouting for Dennis. When he reached her, she grabbed his arm and pointed toward the HOA office. "Go get the records," she yelled. "All of them, before they burn." Through the rolling wall of smoke, I spotted Dennis sprinting across the parking lot toward the HOA office. At first, I couldn't make sense of what he was doing. Everyone else was running away from the fire, but he was charging straight into its path like a man possessed. Then I remembered Karen's order. She had sent him to retrieve the records. Not people, not pets, not medication, paper, folders, evidence of her control. The realization punched me in the gut. "Dennis, stop!" I yelled, but he didn't even turn his head. He fumbled with the office door, shoved it open, and disappeared inside. I broke into a run after him, lungs burning from smoke, legs screaming with every step. By the time I reached the doorway, the heat was nearly unbearable, like opening an oven set to broil. But I couldn't leave him in there. No one deserved to die for Karen's ego. The inside of the office was dim, lit only by the orange glow bleeding through the smoke-streaked windows. Papers covered the counters, scattered like someone had already tried digging through them in a panic. And then I saw him. Dennis crouched near the back wall, dragging heavy cardboard boxes across the floor. Each one was stamped with labels that jumped out at me in bold black marker. Unauthorized assessments, unapproved fines, special collections, personal use, board expenditures, private. For a moment, the truth hit me harder than the heat. Karen hadn't just been power-hungry. She'd been profiting, stealing, manipulating the system she claimed to protect. And Dennis, sweating and coughing as he stacked the boxes, was the desperate pawn. "Dennis, we have to go," I shouted, grabbing his arm. He jerked away, still dragging the top box. "Karen said these can't burn," he choked out. "She said if they survive, everything will be fine." "Dennis, listen to me." I stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "These aren't worth your life. Look around you. The fire is seconds away from this building." His eyes flicked to mine, fear, confusion, guilt all tangled together. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked like someone who understood the weight of his choices. "She told me I had to," he whispered. "She said if I didn't, she'd blame me for everything." Before I could answer, a deafening crack split the air. The ceiling above us groaned, wood snapping as flames punched through the roof. Burning debris rained down, scattering embers across the floor. Smoke thickened instantly, choking and blinding. "Move!" I grabbed Dennis by the collar and hauled him toward the exit. We stumbled through the smoke-filled hallway as the building trembled around us. A beam crashed down behind us, sending sparks flying. Another crack, another fiery burst above. The heat chased us like a living thing, nipping at our heels. We dove out the front door just as a section of the roof collapsed inward with a violent roar. We hit the pavement hard, coughing, gasping, blinking against the brightness outside. I dragged Dennis farther away, and we collapsed behind a parked SUV. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap tearing the sky in half, the entire HOA office erupted, exploding into a towering column of flames that lit up the neighborhood like a hellish sunrise. The explosion from the HOA office rolled through the neighborhood like a shockwave, rattling windows and sending a burst of hot air across my face. It felt like the fire itself had let out a victory roar. Dennis was shaking beside me, still staring at the flaming wreckage, but we didn't have the luxury of freezing. The inferno was growing, curling around houses and swallowing fences. The fire was hunting everything in its path, and we were next. I dragged Dennis to his feet. "Get to your car and go," I yelled. Then I sprinted toward my truck, lungs screaming for clean air that didn't exist. The moment I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I slammed the accelerator to the floor. Flames reflected off my windshield like hungry eyes, chasing me down the street. It felt less like escaping a disaster, and more like fleeing from a living creature determined to catch me. The main road was chaos. Cars packed the exit in a suffocating line, barely moving as thick smoke choked the air. People leaned out their windows shouting instructions or warnings no one could hear clearly. The fire was approaching from both sides now, curling around the neighborhood like two hands about to clap shut. My pulse hammered as I merged into the convoy, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Ahead of me, I saw Sarah's SUV. Her kids pressed their faces against the back window, eyes wide with terror. I gave her a short honk to signal I was behind her. She lifted her hand out the driver's window in a shaky acknowledgement. Behind her, more neighbors followed in a frantic caravan. Elderly couples, families with pets, people who moments ago had insisted they were staying. Now they were all trapped in the same desperate line, praying the fire didn't reach them before the traffic cleared. I inched forward with the rest of them until I spotted a familiar figure frantically waving her arms near the side of the road. Karen. Her car sat at an awkward angle, the front bumper pressed against a fallen tree branch that must have come down moments earlier. She was yelling at it, as if the tree had personally offended her, while flames crept dangerously close from the slope behind her. I almost kept driving. For a split second I considered it. After everything she'd done, after every threat and insult and reckless decision, Leaving her behind would have been the simplest thing. But I couldn't. I wouldn't let the fire take her, no matter how much trouble she'd caused. I jerked my truck onto the shoulder, jumped out, and ran toward her through the sweltering heat. "Karen, get in my truck now." She blinked at me, stunned. "Michael, I can't get the branch moved." "Forget the branch." I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the passenger side. She stumbled, coughing, ash coating her hair and clothes. Once she was inside, I slammed the door and floored the accelerator again, merging back into the slow-moving line of cars. Behind us, the fire surged forward and jumped the road in a roaring burst of heat, like a living wall of flame cutting off the path we'd just driven. People screamed. Engines revved. The convoy lurched forward in panic. But then, just as hope flickered, traffic ground to a complete, suffocating stop. There was nowhere to go. When we returned days later, the neighborhood looked like a black and gray skeleton, stripped of everything recognizable. The once perfect lawns, the freshly painted fences, the neatly trimmed hedges, everything the HOA worshipped had been reduced to charred outlines. The air still smelled faintly of smoke, not as sharp as before, but heavy enough to cling to your clothes and make you swallow hard. I stood beside my truck, staring at what used to be Cedar Hills, and felt a weight settle in my chest. Survival felt different when you had to face what you survived. Officials were already on site. Fire inspectors moved slowly between burned structures, taking photographs, marking collapse zones, and collecting samples. State emergency personnel walked house to house with clipboards, checking off data points, structural loss, fire path, ignition sources. Drones buzzed overhead, mapping the extent of the destruction. And beyond all of that, a separate group waited. Investigators from the county and state, gathering information for a full-scale review. The fire had spread too quickly, too irregularly, and they wanted answers. I spotted Cole Ramirez standing near the remains of the HOA office, which was nothing more than twisted metal beams and a mound of ash. He waved me over, relief clear on his smoke-tired face. "Michael, good to see you on your feet," he said, shaking my hand. "We'll be conducting interviews. Need to understand the timeline, the decisions made, the resistance we dealt with." I nodded. "You'll want to talk to Dennis too." "Oh, we already did," he said, lowering his voice. His statement opened a floodgate. Just then, I noticed Karen standing a few yards away, surrounded by two investigators. Her clothes were clean, as if she had tried hard to present herself as put together, but her eyes were restless, darting around like she was searching for an escape. One investigator asked her about the locked gate. Another asked why she contradicted the evacuation warnings. Karen straightened her shoulders, adopting her practiced tone of authority, and began spinning her story. "I acted in the community's best interest," she said. "There was a misunderstanding. Certain residents exaggerated the situation. The alleged warnings were unclear. The fire marshal's visit was misinterpreted. Every sentence was polished, rehearsed. If anyone is responsible for confusion, it is the homeowners who spread misinformation. She meant me. She didn't say my name, but she didn't need to." Then Dennis walked up behind her, escorted by an investigator. His clothes were still dirty from the evacuation, his face pale. When Karen saw him, she went rigid. Dennis swallowed once, then looked directly at the officials. "She's lying," he said quietly. Karen whipped around. "Excuse me?" Dennis's voice shook, but he kept going. "Karen told me to ignore warnings. She told me to go door to door telling people to stay put. She forced me to retrieve the records during the fire. She locked the gate. She said panic would ruin her position." The investigators exchanged looks. The one closest to Karen asked bluntly, "Is that true?" Karen's face twisted. "He's making this up. He's trying to shift blame." But the investigators cut her off. "We'll need both of you to provide full written statements." As they led them away, state auditors approached the wreckage of the HOA office. They sifted through partially burned binders, melted flash drives, and warped metal cabinets. What they found made everything clearer. Financial irregularities, unaccounted funds, unauthorized assessments, personal expenditures funneled through HOA accounts. The documents Dennis tried to rescue were gone, but fragments remained, enough to expose the deeper rot beneath Karen's leadership. Word spread quickly among the displaced residents. One by one, people approached me, not with fear or hesitation now, but with gratitude. You tried to warn us. You saved lives. If you hadn't pushed back, we'd all be in real trouble. Hearing it didn't erase the devastation, but it softened something inside me. For once, people weren't whispering. They were speaking the truth out loud. Later, Cole joined me near the edge of the canyon. I wanted to tell you this myself, he said. Your early report helped us redirect resources. It gave us time to get crews staged nearby. That warning saved lives, Michael. I let out a slow breath. It didn't feel like victory, but it felt like acknowledgement. Just as we finished talking, an official approached Karen with a thick envelope in hand. She tried to step back, but he followed, extending it firmly. Karen Whitfield, he said, you are hereby served with charges of fraud, obstruction, and endangerment. She froze, her face draining of color. And I realized the real fire was only just beginning. In court, Karen finally faced what she tried to run from: her own decisions. The courtroom was packed, not with angry residents, but with people who had lost homes, memories, and peace of mind. The fire had taken almost everything from Cedar Hills. But the truth, exposed under bright fluorescent lights and sworn testimony, took whatever remained of Karen's authority. She sat at the defense table, shoulders tight, her earlier arrogance stripped away. Gone was the confident HOA president. In her place was a woman caught between her lies and the consequences she never thought would reach her. The prosecutors laid out everything: the locked gate during a mandatory evacuation, the intentional obstruction of emergency personnel, her refusal to allow residents to prepare, the financial misconduct that had been buried under years of manipulated records. Dennis testified first, voice shaky but clear. He admitted what Karen told him to do, how she had sent him into a burning building for boxes she hoped would protect her reputation. Then it was my turn. I described the warnings, the smoke, the ash, the arguments, and the moment she physically blocked the road while the fire closed in. With every detail, the jury's faces hardened. Karen attempted to defend herself, claiming she acted with community order and safety in mind, but the evidence spoke louder. The judge didn't mask his disappointment. He addressed her with a tone that carried the weight of every life she endangered. She was penalized with fines, restitution, and a lengthy probation that barred her from ever holding any position of authority within a homeowners association again. There was even talk of additional charges pending from state fire officials for obstructing emergency operations. Watching her face fall as the sentence was read didn't bring me joy, but it brought a sense of closure, something the whole community desperately needed. In the weeks that followed, Cedar Hills began the slow and painful process of rebuilding. The HOA, once Karen's personal kingdom, was officially disbanded. The state recommended restructuring it entirely under temporary county supervision until residents elected a new board. This time, people were determined to choose leaders based on integrity, not intimidation. Meetings were held in open tents near the canyon edge, where the burned land stretched out like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now shared water, supplies, and stories of escape. Tragedy had stripped away the barriers Karen built, leaving behind something honest. My house had survived, though scarred. Some walls were blackened, and the backyard fence was a pile of charcoal, but it still stood. Many others weren't so lucky. I spent long days hauling debris, helping families salvage anything that the fire spared. There was a sense of unity we'd never had before, forged not by rules or fines, but by survival. As the community worked together, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened: the warnings ignored, the arguments, the rush of escaping flames. It struck me how dangerous arrogance becomes in the midst of a crisis. A single person's pride nearly destroyed an entire neighborhood. If I had stayed quiet or backed down or accepted Karen's authority as Osmanti's unquestionable, the cost could have been so much worse. When the recovery team held a community gathering, someone asked if I wanted to speak. I didn't plan on saying much, but when I looked at the crowd, faces tired but hopeful, I felt the moment call for honesty. If you ever sense danger, I said, don't let anyone's ego override your instincts. Lives matter more than authority, and if you ever find yourself powerless under someone else's decisions, stand up anyway. For the audience watching this video, I'll ask you the same. What would you have done in my place? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Your stories matter more than you know, and every experience helps someone else recognize danger when it comes. As we voted for a new HOA structure, something unexpected happened. A reporter covering the fire's aftermath approached me with a small notebook in hand. She gave a curious smile and asked the question I never thought I'd hear. Michael, after everything, would you ever consider joining the new HOA board? And just like that, another chapter waited on the horizon.